The early morning fog clung stubbornly to the base, curling around the concrete bunkers and rows of tents like a restless spirit. Everything felt suspended in a gray haze, muffling sounds and softening edges. She crouched at the edge of the training grounds, the massive Barrett .50 calories rifle resting against her shoulder. It was more than a weapon, it was an extension of her body, a silent companion that had never let her down. Her fingers traced the smooth contours of the rifle, checking the stock, the scope, the trigger mechanism, each movement precise, methodical. To her, the rifle represented mastery, discipline, and patience, qualities she had honed over years of relentless training. Every click and creak spoke to her in a language she alone understood. The base was slowly coming to life. Soldiers moved in small clusters, running drills, carrying gear, shouting orders, and exchanging light-hearted banter that seemed distant to her focused mind. But she existed in a different rhythm, one dictated by precision and calculation. She adjusted her position, testing the balance of the rifle, feeling its weight settle naturally in her hands. In the back of her mind, she reviewed the impossible scenarios she had trained for countless times, the extreme distances, the shifting winds, the subtle changes in elevation. Her mind was a map of angles and velocities, and she was already calculating, already anticipating. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself, letting her heartbeat match the calm that enveloped her, a stillness that no chaos could disturb. Rumors had been spreading for days about a visiting general, a man notorious for his exacting standards and sharp judgment. Soldiers whispered about how he could size up a soldier in moments, how he could detect fear or uncertainty in the smallest movements. The thought didn't intimidate her, it fueled her. She wasn't here to impress anyone with words, her skill would speak for itself. Her eyes scanned the horizon, assessing distances with practiced precision. The Barrett, cold and formidable, waited patiently in her hands as though it sensed the significance of the day. Every part of her, from the tip of her boots to the grip of her hands on the rifle, was poised for controlled action. Footsteps began to echo across the gravel. At first, they were faint, almost lost in the background of the base's morning activity. Then they became deliberate, heavier, echoing with authority. The general arrived, a tall figure whose presence seemed to command silence even without a word. Soldiers instinctively straightened, voices dropped, and movements slowed as though the air itself was acknowledging his arrival. She didn't flinch, didn't alter her stance. The Barrett rested naturally against her shoulder, steady as her own heartbeat. The general's eyes swept across the training grounds, briefly scanning other soldiers before landing on her. He froze, not abruptly, not with a jolt, but with the slow realization that something about her was different. His gaze lingered on the rifle, its massive black barrel catching the soft morning light, then shifted downward to the badge sewn onto her uniform. The small patch read, 3,200-meter sniper. Time seemed to pause as the general's expression changed, the unreadable mask giving way to a flicker of recognition, perhaps even awe. Soldiers around them felt it too, the sudden stillness, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. She lowered the rifle slightly but maintained her calm, the way a predator maintains composure before striking. Her mind didn't race, it observed. She noticed the subtle change in the general's stance, the shift in his eyes as he absorbed the reality of what she represented. The badge wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was proof of mastery, a record of countless impossible shots made under conditions most would consider unachievable. It was a testament to patience, discipline, and relentless practice. The general studied it carefully, his mind processing the significance of what he saw. She didn't flinch or try to draw attention, there was no need. Her skill, her achievement, her silent authority over the rifle, spoke for itself. The moment hung in the misty air, a quiet acknowledgement that legends weren't made from reputation alone but from unwavering precision and dedication. Even as the morning activity continued around them, the world felt still in that one spot. Soldiers who had been joking a moment ago now moved quietly, aware that something extraordinary was happening. She breathed in deeply, letting the satisfaction of recognition settle in her chest, unspoken yet powerful. The Barrett rested against her shoulder, a loyal companion that had been with her through every impossible shot, every training ground triumph. And in that foggy morning stillness, she knew that this moment was more than a simple acknowledgement, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where her skill could no longer be underestimated or ignored. The days that followed were filled with a tension that was both subtle and heavy, like the charged air before a storm. The general had not spoken much, but his presence was everywhere, an unspoken acknowledgement of her skill that hung in the air like a shadow. She moved through the base with the Barrett slung across her back, the rifle an extension of herself, as soldiers whispered quietly behind her. She didn't seek attention, but the glances she received were impossible to ignore, curiosity mixed with respect, admiration tempered with disbelief. Her reputation had begun to spread silently, a quiet rumor fueled by the impossibility of her achievements. Training became sharper, more focused. Exercises were designed to push soldiers to their limits, but she seemed to exist outside those limits entirely. While others struggled with wind shifts, distance calculations, and the slightest tremors in their hands, she moved with the precision of a machine honed by experience. Each shot she fired was deliberate, each calculation perfectly timed, each movement a study in control. She measured the environment with her eyes, noticing details others would overlook: the way the wind rippled across the sand, how the temperature affected the scope's clarity, the smallest variance in the terrain beneath her target. Her mind worked like a finely tuned engine, processing and adjusting, calculating distances that would seem impossible to anyone else. The general began observing her more closely. He would appear without warning, watching silently from a distance, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made even her careful control feel exposed. She noticed the subtle ways he took notes in his mind, the way he studied her posture, her rhythm, the smooth but lethal coordination of her hands and eyes. It wasn't scrutiny in the typical sense, it was respect forming in real time, a careful acknowledgement of mastery. Occasionally, he would step forward, offering brief advice, always precise and minimal. "Adjust your angle by 1 degree, he would say, or, "Consider the wind change at that altitude." Each word was measured, deliberate, and she followed without question, not because she lacked confidence, but because even the best could always refine perfection. Her confidence grew quietly, strengthened by recognition that came without fanfare. One afternoon, a particularly difficult exercise was set up, a target over a mile away, partially obscured by shifting shadows and uneven terrain. Soldiers had tried repeatedly, each failing to meet the standard, frustration evident in their trembling hands and muttered curses. She lay prone, the Barrett cradled perfectly against her shoulder, her eye aligned with the scope. She assessed the wind, the angle, the shifting light, and made a mental calculation that seemed absurd even to her own logical mind. With the slightest squeeze of the trigger, the shot left the barrel, and the target reacted precisely as she predicted. Silence fell over the field as everyone processed what had just happened. The general approached, his steps deliberate, eyes fixed on the rifle and then on her calm, composed expression. The respect in his gaze was unmistakable now, no longer hidden beneath professionalism. He nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words could convey. The other soldiers looked on in a mixture of awe and disbelief. The impossible had just become reality, and it was undeniable. She allowed herself a small, controlled exhale, not for relief but for recognition. The Barrett rested lightly in her hands, a familiar weight that had always reminded her that mastery was earned, not given. She had faced challenges that would have broken others, had executed shots considered unachievable, and yet remained composed under pressure. The general's presence no longer felt like scrutiny, it felt like validation. As the day wore on, she was assigned increasingly complex tasks. Each one tested her limits in new ways, forcing her to account for variables she had never faced before. Elevation changes, unpredictable wind gusts, long-range targets that appeared and disappeared almost at random, she handled them all with an almost preternatural ease. Her eyes scanned the horizon continuously, always calculating, always anticipating. The base had begun to take notice in ways she had not expected. Whispers turned to quiet admiration, admiration turned to respect. Even the most skeptical soldiers began to treat her differently, consulting her for advice, watching her approach situations with a level of precision and patience that seemed impossible for someone so young. By nightfall, as the fog returned and the base quieted under the muted light of dusk, she sat alone, the Barrett across her knees, reflecting on the day's successes. The general had not approached her again, but she felt his presence in the unspoken acknowledgement of her skill, in the subtle changes in how others interacted with her, and in the growing confidence that she carried quietly in her own mind. Each challenge met, each impossible shot achieved, reinforced a truth she had always known: mastery was not about recognition, but about the relentless pursuit of perfection. And in that pursuit, she was unstoppable. The following morning brought a crisp clarity to the base, the kind of light that made every detail sharp and unforgiving. She moved through the grounds with the Barrett slung across her back, its weight familiar, comforting, almost like an extension of her own body. Today was different. Today the general had assigned her a solo mission, something no other soldier had attempted in weeks. The target was a moving one, set far beyond the standard range, partially obscured by uneven terrain, and the environmental variables were unpredictable. It was a test designed to push anyone to the edge of their skill, but for her, it felt like a challenge she had been waiting for. The moment she lay prone, the rifle settled naturally against her shoulder, the barrel perfectly aligned with the distant target. She scanned the horizon, measuring the wind, calculating elevation, noting the subtle shifts in light that would affect visibility. Her training had prepared her for precision, but her intuition allowed her to see what the numbers alone could not reveal. She breathed slowly, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat sync with the weight of the rifle. Every second stretched deliberately, the quiet hum of the world around her fading as her focus narrowed to the scope, the target, and the countless variables that would determine success or failure. The general watched from a discreet distance, silent and steady, his presence both reassuring and challenging. He didn't interfere, he didn't offer advice. Instead, he observed, his eyes following her every movement with an intensity that could make even the most confident soldier second-guess themselves. But she didn't waver. Her hands, steady as stone, adjusted the scope with precision. Her mind ran through calculations at a speed that was almost imperceptible to anyone else. She factored in wind shifts at different altitudes, the movement of the target, the uneven contours of the terrain, and the subtle changes in temperature that could affect the bullet's trajectory. It was a puzzle, a complex equation, and she was both mathematician and executor in one. The moment to fire arrived, and she didn't hesitate. Her finger squeezed the trigger with controlled force, the rifle recoiling slightly in her hands, and the bullet traveled a path she had predicted with exacting precision. The distant target reacted exactly as she had anticipated, confirming the success of a shot that many would have deemed impossible. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft exhale she allowed herself. Around her, soldiers who had gathered at a safe distance exchanged glances of disbelief. The impossible had once again become reality, and they were witnesses to her mastery. The general approached at a measured pace, his face calm but his eyes revealing the weight of what he had just seen. There was no need for words, acknowledgement hung in the air like a tangible presence. He nodded subtly, a gesture of respect and recognition, and for the first time, she felt the depth of that recognition. It was not just about the impossible shot, the technical skill, or the precision. It was about discipline, focus, and the relentless pursuit of mastery that had brought her to this moment. She lowered the Barrett, keeping her composure, yet a quiet pride settled in her chest. This was validation, unspoken but undeniable. Later, as she returned to the base, the atmosphere had shifted. Soldiers who had been skeptical or indifferent now treated her with an unspoken reverence. The whispers were no longer of doubt but of admiration and respect. Even routine drills carried a new significance, as the general's acknowledgement had set a precedent. Her skill was extraordinary, and it could not be ignored. She found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, the countless hours of training, the meticulous care of her weapon, the mental discipline required to calculate and execute shots at impossible distances. Each effort, each sacrifice, had culminated in this moment of undeniable competence. By evening, the base quieted under the muted light of dusk. She sat alone near the edge of the training grounds, the Barrett across her knees, reflecting on the events of the day. The general had left without another word, but she felt his presence in the change around her, in the subtle shift of attitudes, and in the knowledge that her abilities had been validated at the highest level. She allowed herself a rare, small smile, a private acknowledgement of the journey she had undertaken, the mastery she had earned, and the respect she had claimed. The Barrett rested against her shoulder like an old companion, silent and reliable, a symbol of the precision, patience, and discipline that defined her. In that quiet evening light, she understood that mastery was not a gift, it was earned through relentless practice, unwavering focus, and an unbreakable resolve. The impossible was not a limit, it was a challenge to be met with skill and determination. And she was more than ready to meet it, every time, in every circumstance. The base had seen her proof, the general had recognized it, and she had claimed her place, not through reputation, not through words, but through the undeniable reality of what she could do.